it's different. It's definitely different, and it looks amazing when it's a hoarfrost. It's incredible.
Andy, do you prefer winter to summer?
No.
He's got a hot tub business, Mark. What do you think?
Well, to be honest, I much prefer hot tubbing in the winter than the summer, of course. But naturally, wearing 16 layers of clothes every day gets old.
Hey, how many people fit in these hot tubs?
We can fit up to 8 people in the largest tub. Yeah,
Wallace, take the show on the road.
Is it a date? Live from the hot tub.
You're on the payroll, are you, Mark?
No, he's not. No.
No, I think I'm going to go on the road with Wallace. We'll do it from the hot tubs.
Right.
Can you imagine it?
Actually, I love a good hot tub. I'm a huge fan. Hey, Andy, stay warm, stay dry, and all the very best to you.
Good on you, mate. Thanks very much.
Someone says, Leah, I've never been to the opera, so elitist, but haven't the stories always an opera been the weird and scandalous? Yeah. I say it's time for a change, Ellie.
That's very tedious and old-fashioned position, isn't it?
On that note, Ellie Jones, Mark Sainsbury, thank you very much, and thanks to Rob Kelly for putting the shows together.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, Wallace.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. And Heidi Akine, the Melbourne COVID outbreak sends recent returnees and tourists racing to testing stations here. The government's just announced tougher travel restrictions, so is the Aussie Prime Minister still coming for the weekend? The rest home residents waiting for their COVID jabs months after they were supposed to start. And the tourist hotspots offering a vax and a vacay. Radiation therapy at the hacked Waikato DHB could start again next week, but not at full capacity. Why is New Zealand still sending shed loads of plastic waste offshore? The giant poo pipe that could save Auckland beaches from code browns. And at RNZ, we love a good bird, so tonight, 1,500 of them. We're proud as peacocks.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Anyone who has been in the Australian state of Victoria since Wednesday can no longer fly to New Zealand, regardless of where in Australia they're flying from. The government has introduced new measures to prevent COVID-19 spreading to New Zealand as case numbers in Melbourne rise. It's also bringing in pre-departure testing for anyone who visited Victoria between last Thursday, May the 20th, and Tuesday, May the 25th, and plans to fly home. From next Tuesday, they must return a negative COVID-19 test completed within 72 hours of their departure. A pause on quarantine-free flights from Melbourne remains in place until at least next Friday. People who've been in the Greater Melbourne area since last Thursday and been ordered to get a COVID-19 swab have contributed to a surge at testing centres today. 5,000 recent arrivals must get a test, then isolate until they have a negative result. Among them is Tom, who caught a flight from Melbourne to Auckland on Sunday for a 2-week work trip. Today he joined the queue at the Balmoral testing centre.
I had a email from your New Zealand Health because I'd applied for an entry visa or whatever you call it. They've been in contact with me a couple of times, and the last one was to go and get tested because I was in Melbourne in the period of, I think it was the 20th through to the 24th.
The Ministry of Health is still trying to contact 500 recent arrivals from Melbourne. Met Service is warning people in Canterbury to prepare for flooding, slips and dangerous rivers as the area braces for the most significant rain in 10 years. Meteorologist Andy Best says the red warning is for heavy rain over the next 3 days in Canterbury, south of the Ashley River. He says about 200 to 300 millimetres of rain is expected on the Canterbury High Country and foothills, and between 80 to 100 millimetres on the plains and coast.
This rain is expected to cause quite dangerous river conditions and significant flooding in Canterbury. And there may be some slips, and the floodwaters are likely to disrupt travel. so some of the roads may become impassable.
Andy Best says the rain isn't expected to start to ease until late on Monday. Hospital workers in the Waikato region hope their cybersecurity nightmare will soon be over. Waikato DHB IT systems are still down nearly 10 days after the ransomware attack brought the network to its knees. Kate Gregan reports.
Some staff at Te Kuiti Hospital have told RNZ they have had a terrible week. And in Tokoroa, staff say the IT blackout has been difficult. There are 5 hospitals in the region and all of them are suffering. Despite this, staff and patients are trying to remain positive. In Te Kuiti, workers say things are a little easier as they get used to pen and paper. Meanwhile, hospital patients in Tokoroa are praising medical staff, saying they're doing a wonderful job despite the difficult circumstances. This is Kate Gregan.
A mother says she's battling a school system that's making her son more depressed after he was expelled. Principals are demanding the Ministry of Education do more to support schools that are forced to enrol pupils expelled or excluded from another school. Some of these parents are finding it tough to get their children back into education. The mother, who RNZ has agreed not to name, says the constant rejection of her child by different schools is degrading. More than 1,500 birds are on display as part of the first national bird show to be hosted in Dunedin. Poultry, pigeons, ducks, canaries and other cage birds are all vying for a prize. The Dunedin Poultry, Pigeon and Cage Bird Club is hosting the national event at Forrester Park. Judge Bob Middlemiss says there are plenty of quality birds on show.
We've got a listening standard that gives you, like for a head, you'll get 5 points, for type you'll get 30 points, and it all adds up to 100. And our job is to work out which is the best one. And I always look at it, which one do I want to take home? Because if you're judging it, it has to be the best, because you wouldn't take the, worst one home.
Bob Middlemiss says it's no easy feat preparing birds for showing, but it's rewarding. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. The Warriors haven't managed to win 2 NRL games on the trot this season, but they're hoping that will change against North Queensland in Townsville tonight. Coach Nathan Brown has named teenage sensation Reece Walsh to start at fullback, with captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck playing on the wing. Walsh is set to play just his 6th NRL game, but is already being talked of as a bolter from the Queensland State of Origin squad. Brown, though, feels a State of Origin call-up could be too soon for the 18-year-old.
Personally, I'd like to not see Reece play Origin at this time of his career. He's only so young and he's only played a handful of games in the last 2 years. So it's great they're talking about him, and hopefully Reece just continues to grow and develop with us, and over time those things I'm sure will come his way.
The Warriors sit 9th on the NRL ladder and the Cowboys 10th, with the two sides only separated on points differential. Veteran netballer and former Silver Fern Anna Harrison has flattered coach Dame Nolene Taurua wants her back in the New Zealand side, but it's not going to happen. The 38-year-old Harrison retired from netball in 2018, but returned to the Northern Stars for this year's ANZ Premiership and has been key to the team winning 5 of their 6 games so far to sit at the top of the competition ladder. Her form prompted Taurua to wonder whether Harrison was up for a return to international play, but Harrison has emphatically ruled it out. That's the news.
Kia ora, Julian Wilcox here, in for Kim Hill tomorrow. I'll talk to Dr. Rachel Huckfeld on a landmark gene editing experiment that could help restore sight for some blind patients. We take a peek behind the curtains of Egypt's female weightlifting community. Maya Zayed talks about her documentary, Lift Like a Girl. And the real-life Lorax. Renowned forest ecologist Suzanne Simard explains how trees talk to each other. Join me on Saturday morning from 8 here on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. A significant heavy rain event for Canterbury this weekend. In the west from Northland to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Taupo and Taihape to Wellington, scattered showers tonight, turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa mainly fine, brief rain tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, a few showers tonight, rain developing tomorrow morning. Some heavy falls north north of Westland, easing at night. Canterbury, showers turning to rain tomorrow morning and becoming heavy from afternoon, especially inland. Please refer to the red warning for heavy rain for this region. Snow to 800 metres at times. Strong easterlies developing tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland. Occasional rain, snow above 800 metres until tomorrow morning. Mainly fine about the fjords north of Dusky Sound. And Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government is introducing pre-departure testing for anyone who was in Victoria in the days leading up to the travel pause. And the COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, is speaking now at a press conference. Let's go to that live.
To come to New Zealand. That will come into force from midnight on the 31st of May. In between now and then, people will either need to have a pre-departure test or they will need to be tested as soon as they arrive in New Zealand. We have to recognise that some people who have got flights booked between now and then won't have the opportunity to get the pre-departure test before they come, so they'll need to be tested and isolate until they get the negative test result once they arrive here in New Zealand. That's in keeping with the Section 70 order that the Director General of Health issued yesterday, which says that if you were in Melbourne during that time, when you come to New Zealand, you have to isolate and be tested when you get here. Happy to open up for questions.
What does this mean for Scott Morrison's visit?
We've been obviously talking to them in the lead up to this. That all of the people who are coming on his flight, and it's a dedicated flight for him, they've all had pre-departure tests, including him, and that was already underway. So it shouldn't disrupt his travel to New Zealand.
Why is this needed?
We want to make sure that we're just adding that extra layer of protection. The public health advice that we've had, and our public health teams have been working very closely with them in Australia, is that from the 20th onwards is the period where the risk is a little higher. That is where we've seen a significant increase in the number of potential exposure events in Melbourne. And so adding this requirement from the 20th means that those who were in Australia during that 5 days prior to the pause being put into place, who have then travelled to other parts of Australia, will need to just demonstrate that they haven't picked up COVID-19 along the way before they could come to New Zealand.
And airport systems are all set up to handle this extra paperwork?
That's right. So that's one of the things we had to work through today, was just making sure that all of the systems were ready. The next sort of 48 to 72 hours, there will be some flexibility in the system, recognising that not everyone will be able to comply with that. So if you're on a plane now, for example, that's about to land in New Zealand, well, you won't have been able to meet this requirement, and so that those people will test when they get here, and they'll isolate until they've got their test results.
Will you be asking people about their isolation plans?
Yes, that is part of the arrival process, where people are identified as having been in Victoria for that 5-day period. During that 5-day period, when they arrive, they'll be asked about that. They'll be asked about their isolation plans, their plan to be tested, and all of those things.
In terms of the contact tracing of those 5,000 arrivals, do you know how many have had tests so far?
No, I haven't got a breakdown of that yet. What I do know is that they've all been notified through whatever contact means they gave us when they arrived in the country. So whether it's an email, most commonly it's an email address. If they have a mobile phone number instead, then they will have received a message through that. There are outbound calls. Those outbound calls started last night. I haven't got an update on the number of people who have been contacted through that. But we're certainly pulling out all the stops to get in touch with everybody.
Yeah, there were 500 outstanding who couldn't be reached by email, so have you had any update on how those phone and text follow-ups go?
No, I haven't got an update on that yet, but I will expect over the weekend to be getting an update on how they're getting on with contacting all of those people.
And presumably you'll be marrying up those contacts and testing?
Absolutely, and so the testing, when people are sent to test, they're typically given a number or a code to use. When the test is taken, that code is recorded on the sample, which means that then feeds back into the system in a way that allows us to keep track of that.
And that was the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins there. If you're just joining us, the government is introducing pre-departure testing for some travellers from Australia. This is in response to the outbreak in Victoria, specifically in Melbourne. And it is aimed, it appears, at catching people who left the state of Victoria before the 7-day lockdown there. So anyone who has been in Victoria on or after the 20th of May, even if they're leaving from another state to come to New Zealand, they will be required to return a COVID-19 test, a negative test, within 72 hours of departure if they have been in Victoria on or after the 20th of May. There is also that Section 70 health order, which requires people arriving in New Zealand, if they have been in those hotspots in Victoria, they must isolate at home and get tested, go nowhere until they return a negative test. So the minister there saying that he wants to make sure that there is an extra layer of protection. Now, our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins me now from Parliament. Jane, Scott Morrison is supposed to be coming our way for the weekend, so what's the deal now?
Well, the deal is that the trip is still on, as far as we know. Haven't heard anything official, but all of the signals throughout the day is that visit is still on. Now, all of these pre-departure tests and everything would not apply to Scott Morrison if he does end up coming over. Now, one of the difficulties was that Scott Morrison had actually been in Melbourne on May the 20th, so that is in the time of at the start of the infection, so he will have to get a pre-departure. Well, he's already had a pre-departure test, but that it's more the political aspect for him as opposed to the practical, and there's now nothing in place in New Zealand that would prevent him from coming over, including in that health order.
So it's more about what it looks like to people in his country who are locked down tight in Victoria.
That's right. So he wouldn't be caught by the pre-departure testing requirement, nor the pause on the travel bubble for anyone that had been in Melbourne after the 26th. So this really comes back to domestic politics. You may remember back in 2019, in the middle of the devastating Sydney bushfires, Scott Morrison went on holiday to Hawaii and faced a massive backlash. So that will be one thing that he and his team are thinking about. Is it a good time to come to New Zealand? It's a very important meeting for both the leaders. However, domestic politics is always going to be a major factor when they make those decisions.
And do we know what the schedule is going to be? Because obviously he was destined to go to Queenstown, but he was also going to the rugby match, which has since shifted. What are the two Prime Ministers going to be doing?
So they still have the formal program in place. That rugby match that was going to be on the Sunday afternoon, as you said, has been cancelled. So that's just an empty hole in the program now. That won't be, as we understand, replaced with anything. So Scott Morrison will fly in the afternoon. He'll have a porphyry, and then there'll be a dinner that night, and then there'll be the normal course of events for a visit like this. On the Monday, the two Prime Ministers will lay a wreath at the Arrowtown War Memorial before having formal talks and then a formal media conference. And of course, plenty for them to talk about at the moment. But Queenstown has been chosen as a place where they can both show off their COVID-free situations as two Prime Ministers being able to meet without masks, but also give Queenstown some much needed exposure after a very tough year for the tourist town.
So while Scott Morrison might not get to go to a rugby game, he still may bang into some sports stars. Can you tell us what's happening with Sonny Bill Williams down there?
That's right. Well, an ongoing, not just niggle, but a real tension in the relationship is not just the deportation policy from Australia, but also the 501, the refugee situation in some of those offshore Australian detention centres. Now, years ago, John Key offered to take 150 as part of New Zealand's quota from those detention centres, and that has been an offer that Australia has never taken up. So Sonny Bill Williams and Amnesty International will try to track down Scott Morrison while he's in Queenstown. That was going to happen after the rugby match, but with that cancelled, they're probably not quite sure where he's going to be now. So they still intend to present that petition asking and requesting that Australia does take up that offer and allow New Zealand to take those 150. So that'll be an event happening somewhere down in Queenstown over on the Sunday or the Monday.
Thanks, Jane. That's Jane Patterson, our political editor, joining us live from Wellington there. The extended pause to the travel bubble with Victoria has forced some people to make some changes to their plans. With Victoria in lockdown, the government here has decided to maintain a pause on quarantine-free flights for at least a week. Here's our reporter, Sarah Robson.
An email from the Ministry of Health has interrupted Tom's 2-week trip to Auckland. He touched down from Melbourne on Sunday and is one of the 5,000 people ordered to get a Covid19 test and isolate until they get a negative result. He says it's annoying but necessary.
There's nothing worse than not to do it and then find out that you're actually carrying it with you and it breaks you out again. Because coming from Melbourne, I know what it's like to be shut up for 6 months because that's what happened to us last year.
Tom was queuing up in his car at a community testing centre in central Auckland waiting to be swabbed. It's not the first time he's been caught out by an outbreak in recent weeks.
This is the second time it's happened to me. I was in Sydney earlier in the year when I went through Melbourne Airport, same thing. It seems to follow me around the countryside and the world.
Contact tracers haven't been able to reach about 500 recent arrivals from Melbourne. They're being followed up today by phone call and text. Steph, who's back home for a 3-week visit, found out about the new requirements from a friend last night.
With the situation in Melbourne, I haven't been to any of the hotspot areas, so it has been a little bit. I understand where the fear is, but it is, yes, a very dramatic change of events in a very short period of time.
She too was in her car waiting to get a Covid-19 test.
I'll stay at home until I get a negative test. That's what it looks like from the Section 70. And then, just hopefully the results come back quick.
Testing centres in Auckland have been busier than usual today. At one point, there were 2 teams swabbing people in Balmoral and a wait time of about 45 minutes. Epidemiologist Michael Baker says the government is doing the right thing by requiring those people to isolate and get tested.
The level of risk is not zero, and it's very hard to put a figure on it. We know it's very low, but it is there, and I think this will be reassuring to have those people self-isolate and be tested.
And Michael Baker says the Melbourne outbreak underscores the importance of everyone remaining vigilant.
This is a reminder that, of course, the number one measure that New Zealanders can take is if you have cold and flu symptoms, stay at home and get tested.
There were no new cases of COVID-19 in the community or in managed isolation today. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
And some breaking news now. In the past few minutes, Australia's Chief Medical Officer Paul Kelly has held a press conference about the situation in Victoria. He says genomic testing shows all of the current 30 cases are linked. He says there are hundreds of close contacts in complex settings like nightclubs and bars, which remains concerning as the Indian variant is highly transmissible. He says this lockdown is very different from last year's lockdown, and the Australian Ministry of Health is pushing hard to get an increased number of vaccinations done. He says there were a record number of vaccinations in Victoria in the past 24 hours, with over 41,000 people vaccinated. And if you're just joining us, the COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins has announced new pre-departure testing for people coming to New Zealand who have been in the state of Victoria from on or around the 20th of May. It is almost 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National, and still to come on the program, the aged care residents still waiting for their COVID jabs months after they were due to start. Radiation therapy for cancer patients is likely to be back on at the Waikato DHB by the middle of next week as it starts restoring its IT services. It comes with a caveat though, it won't be at full capacity and some patients will still need to be sent to other centres for treatment. The entire Waikato DHB system crashed 12 days ago after a ransomware attack from overseas. Andrew McRae reports.
Health Minister Andrew Little toured Waikato Hospital this morning to see the extent of the problem for himself. He believes the DHB is making good progress in recovering and restoring IT systems.
The incredible sense I got from talking to people was they rose to the occasion, they've adapted what they do. Yes, it's added some things to their processes, but they're doing a remarkable job.
He says there's no guarantee against cyber attacks.
What we need to make sure is that as the systems here are reinstated and restored, is that the best possible protective measures are put in place and the best mitigations are put in place, so that if something does happen again, we don't see the level of disruption that has been caused by this.
The head of IT and digital for the Ministry of Health, Shane Hunter, was also in town. He says 12 days on from the attack, the focus is on isolating, clearing and resetting the IT system and restoring data from backup systems.
I have to say I've been very impressed with the conversations that I've had with the staff and their commitment to both remedying the current situation, putting in the measures to limit further attacks and to continue delivering services under pretty trying conditions, I have to say.
He describes it as the most significant cyber attack ever in this country.
I mean, we know 2 years ago we had a PHO that was significantly attacked, but it's pretty clear that this is quite a significant attack on the DHB. Yeah. By global standards, I understand that this is not as large as some has been in overall scale, but the reality is it's had a significant impact on the DHB.
The Chief Executive of the Waikato DHB, Kevin Snee, says they're still analysing the data leaked by the hackers.
We're in the process of contacting any patients where there's a confirmed privacy breach, and that should be done today. It's a small number of patients, but that number is likely to change.
Hospital and Community Services Director Chris Lowry says 4 cardiac patients have been transferred to Auckland for care.
We are continuing to monitor our cardiac waitlist, particularly our inpatient acutes, to ensure that there aren't any delays with them getting their treatment and that they are getting treated within their clinically indicated time frame.
Patients in the Waikato region are commending hospital staff following last week's cyber attack. Staff at Tokoroa Hospital have told RNZ the past week's been difficult, but one patient, Tohurangi Kalfata, says hospital staff are doing the best they can despite challenging circumstances.
You have to admire the efforts that's been put in there by all of them, really, you know. Unfortunately, they were hit with that, and they were doing the best they possibly could under the circumstances.
Elective surgery and outpatient clinics at the Waikato DHB are still running at about 80% capacity. For Checkpoint, Core Andrew McRae, Tēnei.
New Zealand's recycling practices are being called into question amid revelations hundreds of tonnes of plastic are still being sent to Malaysia and Thailand. Concerns have been raised for years around the environmental damage caused to developing nations who accept plastic from the rest of the world to be processed. Last year, the government announced permits would be required for exporting low-grade plastic, but so far not a single one has been granted. Recyclers here say that's because only good plastics are headed offshore, but environmental campaigners say it makes no difference. Nita Blake-Person reports.
2.5 years ago, Lei Pengpua travelled from Malaysia to Aotearoa with a plea for New Zealanders.
We really don't want to be a dumping site of the other countries.
But fast forward to 2021 and her message is still the same.
Even developed countries not able or don't want to process the plastic recycle.
Since the start of 2019, more than 10,000 tonnes of plastic has gone to Malaysia. That's despite the government last year bringing in new legislation requiring permits for all exports of hard-to-recycle plastic. So far, there have only been 2 applications and they have yet to be granted. So how is all of this plastic leaving our shores?
We never send anything overseas unless and until it has a market for it. And the whole recycling market has relied on markets that can buy the product and make it into something else. So when there is no market, we stop sending the product.
That's Parul Sood, the General Waste Manager at Auckland Council. She's explaining that the plastic Auckland is sending offshore is of high quality. It's not mixed in with the low-grade stuff, so it doesn't need a permit.
The problematic plastics we are collecting, but it's going to landfill. We are not sending those overseas at all. We are only sending the plastics. It's the 1s, 2s and the 5s that we know there are markets for.
The numbers Parul refers to are the ones you find on the bottom of containers. 1s, 2s and 5s are able to be recycled in New Zealand. But the rest of it, your sushi trays, yoghurt bottles, sour cream containers, mustard bottles and things like that?
They are the ones that the markets have just gone out of them. They're just not there. Unless there is an innovative idea out there to deal with them, they are going to landfill.
More and more councils are saying no to this stuff. Fewer than 10 are now thought to be accepting them for processing. Auckland Council still wants those plastics into your yellow bins, but at the moment they're going to landfill until a recycling alternative can be found. That means most of the plastic we're sending overseas should be the high quality stuff that's easier to recycle. But in Malaysia, Lei Peng Pua says it doesn't matter.
It's very frustrating because we have been working so hard, and I think that people still don't understand that the rubbish you dump or the so-called you are doing recycling, they actually go to the wrong place.
Auckland Council sends a relatively small amount of its plastic overseas, but they're not the only ones doing it. Todd McClay runs Smart Environmental, one of the country's biggest recyclers. He says there isn't the capacity in New Zealand to process all the plastic we've got, but he's confident it's being dealt with properly overseas.
When the local producers can't take it, we're stuck with it, and it doesn't happen that often, like it's irregular. And why that matters is we're producing product to be processed to the standards that exist in New Zealand. Everybody is, right? That is the model here. So because you don't know where it's going to end up.
He says there needs to be much clearer information on packaging around what can be recycled and where.
Every product that you can find in the supermarket has something that looks like a recycling symbol on the bottom of it. But that doesn't mean it can be recycled in New Zealand, and it doesn't mean that it can be recycled at all.
So what do New Zealanders think about plastic heading offshore?
I'm not surprised. Economically, that seems like the most economic-driven response is just to ship it somewhere else as it's not our problem. I don't agree with it personally. I think we need to deal with all our stuff as it is.
I just assumed anything with a sign on it would be, recyclable. So it's weird.
I think that's really, really bad. I feel like there needs to be a lot more information on things about recycling and proper recycling.
In a statement, Environment Minister David Parker said the government was investing significantly in infrastructure to improve recycling, including that being sent overseas. That includes $124 million through the Covid19 Response and Recovery Fund on recycling infrastructure such as optical sorters and weigh bridges. But in Malaysia, Lei Peng Pua says there's a much easier solution.
We have to do something to save ourselves by reduce. Yeah, it's true. Only by reduce that we can save our earth now.
Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on that one. Should New Zealand be sending its plastic waste offshore, whatever the grade of the plastic? Tell us what you think about that. Also, should the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, still be coming to New Zealand? The government's announced some pre-departure testing for those coming from Australia who've been in Victoria. What do you make of that as well? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Cantabrians, get the gummies out and batten down the hatches. Significant heavy rain is expected in the region this weekend. Met Service is warning Canterbury's in for a drenching, with downpours also forecast for parts of the central North Island and possible severe gales for the west coast of the South Island. In Ashley and North Canterbury, dangerous river conditions and flooding are expected. Well, joining me now from Christchurch is weather commentator Richard Green. Richard, hey, right now, what's it looking like?
Well, at the moment, Lisa, you'd think we're in paradise because it's generally clear skies. It's still, it's a lovely late autumn evening, but 24 hours from now, a completely different story. Yeah, so different.
It is the literal calm before the storm, Richard.
Yep.
So how bad is this, this weather that's expected?
I would put it in the severe category. It's very rare that Canterbury has got a red warning or a red alert status, red status warning from Met Service. And it's the terminology, Lisa. When I read something like this, I'm getting the information and looking at some of the data. Things like dangerous river conditions and flooding are expected. Slips and floodwaters are likely to disrupt travel for Cantabrians, some roads impassable, and possibly these floodwaters isolating communities. Now, that's terminology I've never come across from Met Service. And look, we don't want to push the panic button here, but to give you an idea how heavy this rain is looking, it's starting probably mid-afternoon, late afternoon tomorrow, and it's falling on very dry ground. Of course, we're in drought territory here, even this, part of the year. And the amount of rainfall, 200 to 300 millimetres in the Southern Alps, is not unusual. That's quite common. However, it's what's falling across the plains, the coast, and maybe Christchurch, 80 to 120 millimetres. Now, this year so far, Lisa, we've had, for some parts of North Canterbury, 30 millimetres. Now, we're looking at trebling that or quadrupling that in 48 hours, and we've been waiting for nearly, 6 months for that to happen.
Yeah, so what to watch for? Roads and rivers, yeah, when you're talking about being cut off?
Yep, Waimakariri River, Selwyn River. I'd take a look at the Rakaia River, Rangitata River, as we move into mid and south Canterbury. These are areas that are concerns for farmers as well. They'll be getting prepared, obviously stock away from low-lying areas too, with this amount of rain. If it all comes off, this is the thing. This system, though, 24 hours ago, if we were talking, I would have said, well, it looks like Marlborough and North Canterbury. It's inched its way southwards in its projection and getting here. Now it's the entire Canterbury region, so Christchurch, Ashburton, Timaru, inland towns, Methven, Darfield. Population-wise, this is significant, Lisa. It's not to be sneezed at, and we don't see it very often. It's the first red alert for Christchurch in terms of rain or Canterbury that I've seen from Met Service.
Richard, what or who can we thank for this onslaught? What's driving it?
Australia. It actually started there, parts of Tasmania, and also want to go more so Victoria, but South Australia too. But it's actually grown in size and stature as it's moved across the Tasman Sea. It's quite a complex, low-pressure system. Now, the North Island's not free of this either. I mean, you mentioned at the start of our chat here about the West Coast and possible gales. Indeed, that's true. But there's a front crossing the North Island. Aucklanders, tomorrow lunchtime, could be some heavy downpours crossing. Other parts of the North Island as well could get a drenching, not as prolonged. But there's two things to this, Lisa. One is it's falling on hard ground, as I've mentioned, so the runoff will be significant potential for flooding there. But the other thing is it's a 44-hour red alert. Not a 6, not a 12, not an 18, which is very common in New Zealand. This is basically 2 days, and if this does come off, we could be looking at significant problems.
Well, happy Friday, Richard. Hey, can you just tell me one thing before you head off? Is it just dreary and wet, or will it be cold as well?
A little cold. In fact, we didn't touch on the snow, Lisa. Thank you for that. Heavy snow to very heavy snow above 1,000 metres, up to 1,800 metres. Not that low, but for ski fields, this is brilliant. Alpine passes, this could be difficult. But yeah, it'll be grey and dreary in parts of Christchurch, Ashburton at times. But the rain, most intense, seems to be late tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow night, and part of Sunday, then returns again Sunday night. So we haven't had it for months, and then hello all at once.
Hunker down, Richard. Good to talk to you. That is Richard Green, weather commentator, joining us from Christchurch there. Heard him talking about the situation in the South Island, while Waka Kotahi is asking motorists to prepare for wet and windy conditions and potential disruptions on roads this weekend. It says the predicted rainfall could see some rivers breach their flood banks, and it will be actively monitoring the situations with maintenance crews out and about waiting to swing into action. As well as down south, motorists in the upper North Island, as you heard Richard mentioning, including the Bay of Plenty, Coromandel, Auckland and Northland, are being warned to take extra care because heavy swells could coincide with king tides. Iwi e Haere nei a checkpoint, the tourist spots offering a vaccine and a vacay. A new charity building homes is donating all sales profits to help at-risk children in Canterbury. And 1,500 birds swoop into Dunedin. Now that's something to tweet about. Homai o whakaro, love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program tonight. Do get in touch about the Victoria outbreak and ScoMo coming to visit or shipping our waste overseas. Anything that's on your mind, text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
The COVID response minister says that tougher new restrictions on travel from Australia will not affect a visit by Scott Morrison this weekend. The Australian Prime Minister is due to fly to New Zealand on Sunday. The COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, says all of the people travelling with Mr Morrison have already undergone pre-flight testing for coronavirus. Mr Morrison is due to meet New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Meanwhile, the tougher travel restrictions will come into into effect from 11:59pm on Monday, May the 31st. Anyone who was in Victoria from May the 20th to May the 25th can now no longer fly from Australia, no matter where they depart from. People will also need to have a pre-flight negative test within 72 hours before they can travel to New Zealand. Genomic testing has shown that all of the 30 current cases in the Melbourne cluster are linked. Australia's Chief Medical Officer Paul Kelly has just told a media conference, however, that there are hundreds of close contacts in complex settings like nightclubs and bars. He says there were a record number of vaccinations in Victoria in the past 24 hours, with over 41,000 vaccinated. The lockdown in Melbourne and need for arrivals from the city to get tested has meant a massive surge of people seeking COVID swabs here. The Health Ministry says the onset of cold and flu season has also contributed to the increased numbers arriving at testing centres. The Ministry, however, is still attempting to contact 500 of the 5,000 arrivals from Melbourne. It's asked to get tested and self-isolate. Waikato DHB staff say it's been a terrible week without their IT systems, but they're slowly getting used to using pen and paper again. Patients have joined Health Minister Andrew Little in praising the work of the staff. Andrew Little says that some of the IT systems may be back online next week. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It is time for the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, let's talk about Genesis Energy, right? It struck a gas supply deal with Methanex. And it's what? To support the security of the electricity system? How so?
Well, we've had... notwithstanding the rain story we had just before the news there. Look, the hydro lakes are not at capacity. They're way below their normal average, and that is causing some concern about whether or not we're going to have the power we need to get through the winter. And it's not just consumers, it's businesses too. Some of them are very big users of energy. One of the largest energy users is Methanex. They use most of the natural gas. They're the biggest natural gas customer in the country by far. And so what they've agreed to do is shut down one of their, I guess it's a line or a plant that they have. And so what they're going to do instead is they're going to divert that natural gas to Genesis, which is going to use it to power, to provide supply to their customers who may need it, as well as to power up their Huntley station. Now, they've got 5 generators there. 3 of them are dual fuel, so they often use coal as well as natural gas. And then they have a couple that are just for natural gas. So they're going to try and use those first because the emissions from natural gas are far less than coal. That's their preference. But again, natural gas is in short supply, relatively speaking. We don't really have a lot. We have had some issues with that. It's a complex issue, probably more complex than the few minutes we have to talk about it. But to suffice to say that the market surely didn't like that very much, and the power company's share price dropped 1.6%. And interesting, New Zealand Oil and Gas's share price, it rose 5%. So that's just going to show you where we're at right now in terms of the mix that we need to transition to that 100% renewable energy future that we're looking for.
Now, you've got some consumer confidence info, but you say it's largely unchanged this month. So what does that mean? Are we flatlining in terms of our confidence?
That's pretty good. Did you read my script earlier? No. Oh, yeah. Well, that's pretty much what is happening. It seems like consumers are not too sure whether they should be spending their money or saving their money maybe for a holiday, or if they're worried about inflation. There's a lot of things happening there. So consumer spending is still pretty strong. People still think it's a pretty good time to buy a major appliance. It was up 1 point. But there's some issues there. On one hand, consumers are feeling a little less confident, but they're still spending their money. How long that continues, it's hard to know with so many conflicting signals out there.
Tell me, what is considered to be, obviously this is the barometer, if you would go out and buy something reasonably big for your house. So what is the barometer? What's big? Washing machine, dryer?
Washing machine, spa, pool. You know, that's kind of a bigger
Not a
item.
kettle.
Not a kettle, no. It's going to be something pretty substantial. And, there was a lot of additional spending, and it could have been, well, of course, house prices really went sky high. So if you had a home, maybe you splurged a little bit now. Interest rates, there's a lot of concern about inflation. Maybe prices are going to, we talked about the Reserve Bank governor earlier in the week suggesting that house prices would go sideways. All these things weigh on consumers' wallet.
And make them more cautious.
Make them more cautious. So it's hard to know what this actually is signalling.
All
Maybe
right, we'll
a
wait
shift.
for the next instalment then.
Well,
but in the
yes.
meantime, should we go for a quick trot
Why
around the markets?
not? Okay, so look, our index dropped 0.5%. That's the top 50 index. 0.5%, 62 points down to 12,182. And that's really in contrast to what was happening in Asia. And again, that is probably because of what we heard earlier this week with Fisher & Paykel, uncertainty about its outlook, power companies, a few other things. And there's a concern that some of our company stocks were a little bit pricey anyway, so there could be some profit taking. The New Zealand dollar, interesting, is hanging on to its gains that we saw earlier in the week, 72.7 US cents and 93.9 Australian. Now, we did drop a little against the British pence to 51.2. And that's partly because there's some expectation that the Bank of England is going to hike interest rates sooner than later.
Okay, Nona, thanks for that. That's Nona Peltier with Business News. Some vulnerable rest home residents who were supposed to start getting their COVID jabs from March are still waiting in the queue. Earlier this week, the government revealed rollout of immunisations for the wider public has been pushed back until the end of July, but it denies that's a delay. The COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins, says there's no confirmed delivery schedule for the Pfizer jabs beyond July and the stockpile is being run down. According to the government's own vaccine sequencing framework, rest home residents are in Group 2 and due for the jab from March, ahead of healthy people 65 plus who are in Group 3. Jill Woodward, CEO of Auckland's Elizabeth Knox Home and Hospital, says they've only just been given a start date months after the fact.
We've got 213 residents, and the majority of those residents are at hospital level of care. We were expecting, the early communication indicated that vaccination would start somewhere from end of April into May. We've fortunately, and we're really relieved and pleased that we've finally got a date, which is the end of next week, for our vaccination program to start. And we're expecting the majority of our residents will want to be vaccinated.
So just to be clear, you were in, I gather, then priority group 2.
Yes.
And even though you were told you'd start at the end of April, as of today, none of your residents have had a jab at all?
Yeah, that's right. Our families, our residents and families have been incredible coping with the various restrictions we've put on them in the last 15 months, and I think our sector's done really well. But they have felt concerned that we haven't been able to give certainty of dates for vaccination, and I think we can all identify with that. I think that the thing that has concerned so many people has been the national variations in this.
Yeah, what do you mean by that, Jill? What have you been observing?
Well, concerns have been raised with me in the past few weeks that fit well over 65-year-olds who come to see their family member that lives here in Knox have already got appointments to have their first COVID vaccination in another part of New Zealand where they live, and they're coming without naming regions. They come from a pretty low risk area, and so these families do get concerned because they've gone along so well with the restrictions that we've put in place over the last 15 months and done it without complaint to keep mum and dad and the rest of the community safe. And so now and when we say we don't know when we were going to have vaccinations done, I suppose for them it's just lack transparency, and that's pretty understandable. In their position, I'd feel the same way.
How do you think the communication has been?
We've certainly been getting regular communication from the DHB. I can't say they've certainly kept in regular, weekly and sometimes twice weekly contact with us. The thing that's been difficult is understanding why it was delayed and understanding where we stood with all this. And I think that's been quite confusing, and it's been confusing for us, it's been confusing for residents. They've got friends who live in other parts of New Zealand where their mates in other care homes have had their vaccinations, and so it always makes... It just creates an environment of uncertainty, and I think the sooner we can get our residents fully vaccinated, the more comfortable we're all going to feel.
Jill, do you understand now why there has been a delay? Are you clear on what the reason is?
No, I don't know what has created the delay. I mean, I suppose most of us will have made assumptions that, this has been the largest vaccination program undertaken in New Zealand, and these are large DHBs in Auckland, and it's, I think that we've all tried to be as understanding as possible, and maybe some of the issues in more provincial areas have been... There's been a smaller number of homes, obviously, for vaccinations to take place, and it's been easier to do. But we're in a high-risk part of New Zealand, and we're just going to be relieved to get this done.
Yeah, so how are you feeling? Has everyone had their flu jabs? And obviously we've now got the situation with Melbourne and the travel bubble. So, yeah, are you feeling, a bit on edge?
We remain really vigilant here and we still have a weekly COVID-19 meeting here. We've still got a very coordinated approach to what we're doing. But yes, we've got a lot of residents who live in this home whose families do live overseas, and so we've had advice from the officials have said that it's been safe up until just last night for people to be travelling between Australia and New Zealand, and so it's pretty reasonable to assume that among our visitors there have been folk that have been coming to visit family members. And they've travelled from overseas. They've travelled from Australia. So I think this whole sector remains vigilant all the time.
And that's Jill Woodward, CEO of Elizabeth Knox Home and Hospital. And speaking of vaccines, fancy the thought of lying on a sun-soaked beach, sipping a cocktail and getting a COVID-19 jab while you're at it? Well, a growing number of countries are offering just that, with Guam, the Maldives, San Marino, as well as some US states opening up to tourists looking to beat vaccination waiting times back home. But questions to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade about the rise of vaccine vacations have been met with stern warnings. Nick Trubridge reports.
Move over Airbnb. This is the age of Airbnb. That's air, vaccine and vacation for those who aren't aware.
Yeah, it's an opportunity because we're getting now outreach from Bangkok, Thailand, the Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and other places that like Vietnam as well.
Meet Carl Gutierrez, the former governor of Guam and the current president and chief executive of the Guam Visitors Bureau. He's one of the masterminds behind Airbnb, a startup fit for the COVID era that's just launched in the tiny Western Pacific US territory. Guam offers holidaymakers 3 vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna and the one-shot Johnson & Johnson jab.
We already have guests here from Japan who are covering the Olympics from the US CBS network, and they decided to come here and get it done and take the Johnson & Johnson so that they can return to Japan to cover the Olympics as quickly as possible. So it's working.
As of right now, you and I can't book an Airbnb in Guam, unlike places like the Maldives, which is open to all travellers who can produce a negative COVID-19 test result. It's only allowing US expats to book vaccine holidays. But Mr. Gutierrez says it may not be long before Kiwis and others can come too.
Our protocols are softening up a little bit, so it would make sense now to invite the Americans here, and then eventually the non-U.S. citizens to also come and get their vaccinations here because of the slow rollout of their vaccination process in their countries.
So perhaps at a stretch it could turn out to be perfect timing for Kiwis, with the government this week saying it'll be at least the end of July before the Covid-19 vaccine is rolled out to the general population. Covid-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins then walked that back slightly.
Our goal has been to get a secure delivery schedule with Pfizer for July onwards, which we're hoping that we'll be able to lock that in at some point in the next week or so. And then we'll be able to provide more detail to New Zealanders about what to expect from July onwards.
So if there is a delay, will Kiwis look to head overseas? CNN's reported the US is welcoming those on vaccination holidays, while the tiny micro-state of San Marino, landlocked by Italy, is even offering visitors the Russian Sputnik vaccine. We asked House of Travel Chief Operating Officer Brent Thomas for his take.
What we do know is that there are certain countries around the world who are saying, come to us and we'll vaccinate you and have a holiday there. There also is potentially opportunities for people who have got dual citizenship where they could go back to, say, a place like the United Kingdom, who is progressing so well with their vaccination program, and potentially they could get vaccinated there.
But Mr Thomas doesn't see vaccination holidays becoming much of a trend until New Zealand's isolation requirements soften for people returning home.
We need to get clarity from the New Zealand government on when is it going to be possible for people to come to New Zealand once they are vaccinated. And part of the problem with that will be is we need to get the rollout done of the vaccination program here as quickly as possible so we get to herd immunity in New Zealand.
Checkpoint asked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade for its 2 cents on Kiwis making future Airbnb bookings in the likes of Guam and the Maldives. It responded immediately with advice not to travel overseas due to the pandemic, associated health risks and widespread travel restrictions. Asked if it's aware of any Kiwis travelling to vaccination holiday hotspots, MFAT says it doesn't track the reasons why people decide to travel overseas. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
It's 7 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Moriaki e ngā pitapita kōrero after the news at 6. Principals demand more support for schools forced to enrol violent students. No swim warnings are closer to becoming a thing of the past for Aucklanders as a $1 billion water care project moves to the next step. With construction on the Central Interceptor now well underway, our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Simon Rogers went behind the scenes.
Pack your togs, grab your towel and check whether the beach is safe to swim in. That's the routine Aucklanders have to follow before heading for a dip in the ocean. It's because downpours can quickly make beaches a health risk. Earlier this year, 50 were declared no swim zones after a heavy downpour. Now, the biggest wastewater project in New Zealand hopes to tackle Auckland's sewage and water woes. The $1.2 billion Central Interceptor tunnel is now 8 months into its 5-year construction. At 15 kilometres long, it'll run from Greyland to Mangere to collect sewage and stormwater, preventing it overflowing into our waterways. Today, the focus is on completing the main shaft in Mangere before the tunnelling starts in the next few months. I'm here at the main Mangere pump station, standing down in the launch shaft, which is 40 metres deep. In the next few months, the TBM will be lowered down here before it begins its journey digging all the way to Greyland. Boan Jovanrich is the lead engineer for tunnel and shafts. He's been part of the process for over 6.5 years, way back when it was in its design process. After several years waiting, the tunnel boring machine that'll do all the drilling has received a warm welcome.
Yeah, when the tunnel boring machine arrived, it was a bit like Christmas. Since then, we've been unpacking it, preparing it for launch.
While drilling, they hit a layer of sand 35 metres below the surface, finding treasure that's now providing Auckland Museum with a rare glimpse into our seabeds.
Lots of shells. We've been through shell beds that are 3 to 4 million years old, various whale vertebrae, and other shells that have never been seen before.
The journey takes them through the Manukau Harbour, where they'll dig as low as 110 metres down. The 200-metre long train-like machine has a set of spinning blades at the front, guided by one crew member from a narrow cabin filled with buttons. Shane Kunis is Watercare's Executive Program Director. He explains what's behind the tunnel boring machine's name.
We've got our tunnel boring machine, Hiwa I Tarangi. She was named after a Matariki star by the local school children. It's where you send your hopes and dreams for a prosperous new year. And we felt it was very appropriate considering the year we've had.
He says the machine's vital to cleaner, greener waterways.
We'd all like to be able to go to the beaches after it rains and not have to worry about will we get sick. And Central Interceptor is the cornerstone of that improvement program.
And it's long overdue.
The need has been there for a long time. I guess we reached the point where we had to do it. It's taken 10 years of planning to get to this stage. It's actually going to take longer to plan this project than it is for us to deliver it.
Wastewater will be collected from Grey Lynn, Blockhouse Bay, Mount Roskill and Onehunga through the tunnel. Then it's all processed here at the Mangere Wastewater Treatment Plant.
So in the old parts of Auckland, the stormwater just enters the wastewater system when it rains and it overwhelms the system, and then we get overflows into the waterways. And with Central Interceptor, that's no longer going to happen. We're going to collect and store that combines stormwater and wastewater and then bring it down to the Mangere Wastewater Treatment Plant where it will be highly treated before it's discharged. Most waterways, Cox's Bay, they often come out, Miola Creek, and a lot of the internal streams within central Auckland. And so it's going to be great to be able to clean those up and take that pressure off them.
So for swimmers, it's good news.
As I do go swimming in a number of those beaches around Auckland, and it's going to be great when you don't have to worry about the fact that it's rained 2 days before and you can just go out for a swim because it's a great day to go swimming.
Though there's still a few years to wait before things are fully completed in 2025.
Cash, holidays, full university scholarships, those are just some of the things being dangled in front of Americans to encourage them to get vaccinated. World Watch's Paulina Lau has the details.
Good evening and welcome to the Vaccination giveaway, where we will announce one winner of $1 million.
Ohio led the pack with its Vaccination lottery for 5 lucky winners. Anyone who has had at least one jab can enter to win $1 million.
Abigail Buginski from Silverton, congratulations! You just won $1 million in the Vaccination giveaway, and what a night it is for you.
Abigail Buginski was driving to her parents' house when she got the call from the governor. She thought it was a prank.
I was screaming enough that my parents thought that I was crying and that something was wrong. When I started yelling that I won $1 million and I was going to be a millionaire, they told me to calm down.
California has seen Ohio and it's upping the ante. $1.5 million lottery jackpots for 10 winners.
We're making available the largest prizes of any state in America.
It's also offering $50 gift cards with every inoculation. Across the country in New York, the state is targeting young people with 50 fully paid university scholarships up for grabs. Those between the ages of 12 to 17 who get their first Pfizer shot between now and July the 7th could win a full tuition, room and board scholarship to any of New York State's public universities. But for those already at university or less college-minded, there are other incentives like seats for Knicks playoff games and lottery tickets. CVS Pharmacy is jumping in on the trend, launching a sweepstake, prizes including cash, Super Bowl tickets and European and Caribbean cruises. New York City will send vaccine buses to the beach for a long weekend.
Go, get vaccinated, hit the beach. Real simple.
The vaccine rollout has been successful, but demand is dipping. 40% of America is vaccinated, which means 60% still isn't. But states are reopening. New Jersey has lifted most mask mandates in time for the summer. Sports games are hoping to return to real-life crowds, planning on packed stands in the autumn. For Checkpoint, Paulina Lau.
Some feedback on the Aussie Prime Minister coming to New Zealand. This person says, Jane says, I don't agree with him visiting New Zealand at any time. I'd want him to wear a mask if I met him.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata at DNA. The Covid-19 Response Minister says there is some flexibility to allow people to adjust to measures designed to stop COVID-19 spreading from Australia. As case numbers rise in Melbourne, the government here has announced new restrictions. It's bringing in pre-departure testing for anyone who visited Victoria between Thursday last week and Tuesday this week and plans to fly to New Zealand. From next Tuesday, Thursday, they must return a negative COVID-19 test within 72 hours of their departure. Chris Hipkins says there needs to be extra protection.
Adding this requirement from the 20th means that those who were in Australia during that 5 days prior to the pause being put into place, who have then travelled to other parts of Australia, will need to just demonstrate that they haven't picked up COVID-19 along the way before they could come to New Zealand.
A scheduled visit to New Zealand on Sunday by the Australian Prime Minister is going ahead. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says Scott Morrison and his contingent are on a dedicated flight. He says everyone on the flight has had pre-departure tests, including Mr Morrison. Genomic testing in Victoria shows that all of the 30 COVID-19 community cases are linked. Australia's Chief Medical Officer Paul Kelly says there are hundreds of close contacts in complex settings such as nightclubs and bars. He says that is concerning because the Indian variant is highly infectious. Mr Kelly says the Australian Ministry of Health is working hard to get an increased number of vaccinations carried out. He says in the past 24 hours, a record number of 41,000 people have been vaccinated. The head of the Health Ministry's IT and digital team has described the cyber attack on the Waikato DHB as the biggest event of its kind in New Zealand ever. The DHB was hit 12 days ago and its system is still down. It's expected to slowly come back online next week. Shane Hunter says whatever the size of a cyber attack, the main motivation is mainly money.
By global standards, I understand that this is not as large as some has been in overall scale, but the reality is it's had a significant impact on the DHB.
Shane Hunter says battling with cyber criminals is a game of cat and mouse. A patient in Waikato says staff in Tokoroa have been coping well using a manual system. 5 hospitals in the region remain offline after ransomware crippled the DHB's IT systems. Staff at Tokoroa Hospital have told RNZ the past week has been difficult, but one patient, Tohu Rangikaupata, says staff have handled the situation.
They're working so well within under that system is that they're coping very well with it. And I believe however long it takes, then we have to live with it.
Health Minister Andrew Little says the DHB is making good progress to get the systems back online. The United Nations Human Rights Council has agreed to open an investigation into this month's conflict between Israel and the militant group Hamas. 24 out of 27 countries voted in favour of the resolution. The BBC's David Willis reports.
The investigation will look into whether crimes were committed, not just in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, but in Israel as well. The resolution also calls for the creation of an ongoing commission of inquiry into events in the region. In an apparent reference to countries that ship weapons to Israel, the UN Human Rights Council also urges the 47 member states to refrain from transferring arms that could be used to commit violations of humanitarian law.
More than 240 people were killed in the conflict, which lasted 11 days and was considered one of the most violent in years. A mother says she's been battling a school system that's making her son more depressed after he was expelled. Principals are demanding the Ministry of Education do more to support schools which are forced to enrol pupils expelled or excluded from another school. Some of these parents are finding it tough to get their children back into education. The mother, who RNZ has agreed not to name, says she's finding it hard.
I have one child that can't go to school, that wants to go to school, and can't partake in anything, and is getting more and more depressed and more upset each and every day because he's not getting the opportunity that the other children are.
She says the constant rejection of her child by different schools is degrading. People in Canterbury are being encouraged to clear out drains and gutters before the heavy rain due over the weekend arrives. In a code red warning, Met Service says about 200 to 300 millimetres of rain could fall on the Canterbury High Country and foothills, and between 80 to 100 millimetres on the plains and coast over the next 3 days. The heavy rain will start on Saturday evening and continue until late Monday. Fire and Emergency is recommending that if people haven't cleaned out their spouting, gutters and drains recently, now would be a good time to do it. It also says if water leaks through light sockets, turn off the power as short circuits can cause fires. It's 5.5 minutes past 6. The Hurricanes say they won't be giving former teammate Jeremy Thrush any special attention when they play their Western Force and Super Rugby action in Napier tonight. The 36-year-old Thrush, who played more than 100 games for the Hurricanes, has said he's out to wind up a few of his former teammates. The Hurricanes struggled with discipline during the Aotearoa competition, and coach Jason Holland says it's something they continually need to work on.
We're always working on our COG stuff around how we make sure we're engaged in the moment. Nothing specific to this week or nothing specific to any individual, but it's a constant thing for us around the last month or 6 weeks around making sure that we understand what's important next and we don't get caught up in any rubbish.
The match kicks off at 7:05. Manu Samoa will play an extra match against the Māori All Blacks on their New Zealand tour. Their tour will now kick off in Wellington against the Māori side on June 26th. The Wellington Phoenix are now in control of their playoff destiny in football's A-League. The Central Coast Mariners have done the Phoenix a favour by beating Macarthur FC 2-1 in Sydney. Macarthur still hold the sixth and final playoff position, but are just 2 points ahead of the Phoenix, who they play in the final round. The result means if the Phoenix win their 2 remaining regular season games, starting with Sunday's match against the Perth Glory at Eden Park, they will be guaranteed a finals berth. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life's spicing things up with a visit to the Wararapa farm where they are mixing chocolate with chilies. Datsun singer and songwriter Dorf de Borst selects a mixtape. And because fingerprints were used to crack a crime case for the first time on this day in 1920, we've got a Sonic Tonic dedicated to digits, the incriminating ones, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. A significant heavy rain event for Canterbury this weekend. In the west from Northlands to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty, showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms. Taupo and Taihape through to Wellington, scattered showers tonight, turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa are mainly fine, but brief rain tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, a few showers tonight, rain developing tomorrow morning. Some heavy falls north of Westland, easing at night. Canterbury showers turning to rain tomorrow morning, becoming heavy from the afternoon, especially inland. Please refer to the red warning for heavy rain for this region. Snow to 800 metres at times, strong easterlies developing tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional rain. Snow above 800 metres until tomorrow morning. Mainly fine about the fiords north of Dusky Sound. And Chatham Islands, occasional rain or drizzle. RNZ National, it's 6:08.
Just an absolutely delightful weather-filled weekend ahead of us. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The Covid-19 Response Minister says further limitations on travel from Australia will ensure a spike of Covid-19 cases in Melbourne remains low risk to New Zealand. The government's also bringing in pre-departure testing for anyone who visited Victoria in the last week and plans to fly to New Zealand. Chris Hipkins has explained the public health advice which led to the new measures.
From the 20th onwards is the period where the risk is a little higher. That is where we've seen a significant increase in the number of potential exposure events in Melbourne. And so adding this requirement from the 20th means that those who were in Australia during that 5 days prior to the pause being put into place, who have then travelled to other parts of Australia, will need to just demonstrate that they haven't picked up COVID-19 along the way before they could come to New Zealand.
Chris Hipkins says for the next 48 to 72 hours there'll be some flexibility in the system. That means people arriving in New Zealand over the weekend who've been in Victoria will be asked about their isolation and testing plans. The pre-departure testing requirement will come into effect until next Tuesday. Won't come into effect until next Tuesday.
In between now and then, people will either need to have a pre-departure test or they will need to be tested as soon as they arrive in New Zealand. We have to recognise that some people who have got flights booked between now and then won't have the opportunity to get the pre-departure test before they come, so they'll need to be tested and isolate until they get the negative test result once they arrive here in New Zealand.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is scheduled to visit Queenstown on Sunday. There was some uncertainty he'd be able to make the trip because he was in Melbourne last week. But under the new measures, Chris Hipkins confirmed Scott Morrison can fly across the ditch.
All of the people who are coming on his flight, and it's a dedicated flight for him, they've all had pre-departure tests, including him, and that was already underway. So it shouldn't disrupt his travel to New Zealand.
A pause on quarantine-free flights from Melbourne remains in place until at least next Friday. A cybersecurity expert says the ransom demand for Waikato's DHB hacked data would likely be in the millions or even tens of millions of dollars and only payable by cryptocurrency. Staff is reporting that the Ministry of Health has identified the ransomware used in last week's cyber attack as one called Zeppelin, which the Ministry of Health is not denying. Jordan Bond reports.
Fabian Wosar of cybersecurity company MCSoft says if it's confirmed, this would be the biggest Zeppelin data breach he's heard of. Mr. Wosar says the hackers clearly know what they're doing and who they've hit.
They probably also have a good understanding of how valuable the data is that they have taken. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was at least a 7, maybe even an 8-figure ransom. It almost certainly will be through cryptocurrency, whether that's Monero or Bitcoin.
Mr. Wosar says the Zeppelin ransomware is a kit that can be bought on dark web marketplaces.
A lot of people who purchase these kits, they never purchase the updates. Especially older versions of Zeppelin have certain vulnerabilities that would allow a company like us to recover the data and decrypt the data without the involvement of the threat actor, meaning without them having to pay any form of ransom.
The company's contacted New Zealand authorities to offer its services. Mr. Wosar says regardless of how and when the Health Board gets access to its data, it would have been copied by the hackers and may well be elsewhere online. Andrew Little, who's the Minister of Health and the Minister responsible for the spy agencies, would not answer a question about whether he'd heard that the ransomware is Zeppelin.
Look, we know that it is a ransomware attack. There are different families of ransomware, but how they operate differs from one to the other. And I think part of the job of the National Cybersecurity Centre is, as part of their investigation, is to understand exactly what happened, exactly what the malware that was installed, how it operated, how long it's been there, and the harm that has been done.
Mr. Little says the DHB is making good progress recovering its lost data and restoring its IT system. For Checkpoint, call Jordan Bond. Aho.
Principals are demanding the Ministry of Education do more to support schools who are forced to enrol violent pupils. Currently, if a child is excluded or expelled from one school, the Ministry can force another to take them on. But principals say that's a problem if there's no good support in place, and they have legal backing behind them. Our reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
It's degrading for the child. It's a constant rejection. It's a complete rejection.
This mother faces a battle like this every day. Her 13-year-old child, who RNZ has agreed not to identify, has been expelled from school and is having trouble finding a new one.
I have one child that can't go to school, that wants to go to school, and can't partake in anything, and is getting more and more depressed and more upset each and every day because he's not getting the opportunity that the other children are.
These are personal crises people have day after day. But at the highest level of governance, principals are fighting the ministry over these issues. Principals say they can't just be forced to put difficult children in schools without a proper plan. And they say the ministry isn't providing one. Today, the Principals Federation released a legal opinion backing that up. Its president, Perry Rush, says it's clearly on their side.
Well, look, I think this is really a watershed legal opinion because it does make it very clear that if a young person is required to be enrolled in your school, that they must come with appropriate resourcing relative to the degree of behaviour that has been seen in the past.
By this, he means that people should have a risk management plan so teachers know what to do when problems arise. And he doesn't want this to end up before a judge or jury.
We're very keen not to get to any court challenge. The power of this legal opinion is for the ministry and the ministers to be able to say, we want to keep every young person in school, we don't want exclusions, let's make sure the system serves really complex young people who are at risk.
The Associate Minister of Education, Jan Tinetti, is responsible for learning support. She sent through a statement to RNZ saying she really feels for students and teachers in this position. She says last week The budget invested $17 million for intensive wraparound support for pupils in these kinds of situations. Children's Commissioner Judge Andrew Beecroft says he won't comment on the legal opinion, but he thinks in most cases, excluding children from mainstream classes won't be for the best.
That's better for the children. They'll thrive. It's better for other children. They learn empathy and kindness. It's better for the community. And in a way, that vision is a complete, I guess, rejection of the old-fashioned model that was so last century, where we separated children from mainstream.
The Ministry of Education says it's received the legal advice from the Principals Federation. It expects to update schools on the next steps in July. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Tom Kitchener-Ho.
Midwives are asking for stricter limits on the amounts of polluting nitrates allowed in people's drinking water. It's in response to new research showing the risk of premature births can increase dramatically when the amounts of the chemical climb to less than half the current safe limit. Our reporter Conan Young and cameraman Nathan McKinnon have the story.
The study from Stanford University found the chances of a baby arriving anywhere between 9 and 20 weeks early shot up by 47% when there were just 5 milligrams of nitrate per litre of water. The current safe level here and around the world is twice that, at 11.3 milligrams. The drinking water at Kylie McEwen's Mid-Canterbury Lifestyle block is in the danger zone identified in the research, being at 6 milligrams. She gave birth to her second child last Sunday. The very next day, the new research hit the headlines here. In some ways, she's glad she didn't know about the risk the water from her private well could potentially be doing to her unborn child, as the stress would have been too much to bear.
Thankfully, I didn't have a preterm birth, and even though I was on this property when the nitrate levels were at 6 for my previous pregnancy, that wasn't a preterm either, so quite happy to have missed that. I suppose it's really concerning now just how quickly damage can be done by the nitrates, because if your gestation's less than that full term and it's still having those sorts of outcomes, and we plan on being here for decades, so what does that mean for us and my kids growing up?
Having just given birth for a second time, decisions about a third child are a long way off being made at the moment. But knowing what she now knows, Kylie says if she does decide to have another baby, she won't be taking any risks and will be using bottled water instead.
If needs must, then that's something we're going to have to do, but it again doesn't align with our lifestyle here. You know, we're rural property and look after ourselves and that sort of thing, and to say, oh sorry, your water's not of a standard that's drinkable, you need to go down the road and pick up bottles of water for yourself and your family, it's not quite right.
With her elderly parents also living on the property, there's the added worry of the link between nitrates and bowel cancer. She's annoyed at the Canterbury Regional Council for treating high nitrate levels in the same way as other contaminants such as E. coli, and says while the latter can be avoided, there's nothing she can do to stop the nitrates washing into her underground well from neighbouring farms.
If we had E. coli, we'd know very quickly, right? And we'd know how to get help. But if nitrates are in our system and it's going to affect us long term with bowel cancer, or it's going to affect a pregnancy that I have, then that's not going to show for decades or months. And so they're not related as far as I'm concerned. So we shouldn't, while it may be our responsibility to get it tested, I'm not able really to do anything without throwing thousands of dollars at it or purchasing bottled water.
Claire MacDonald from the College of Midwives says the message went out yesterday to midwives to tell mums on private wells, used by an estimated 600,000 people in this country, to get their water tested.
New Zealand currently uses the World Health Organization threshold of 11.3 milligrams as the limit for drinking water. The studies that were undertaken overseas that have been reviewed by some of our top public health experts suggest that we should be considering 5 milligrams as the threshold at which pregnant women and also women who have babies who are being bottle fed would need to look at reducing the risk.
Ms MacDonald says if drinking water exceeds 5 milligrams, then mums should switch to bottled water. She says the study showed preterm births happening as early as 20 weeks when nitrates were high, noting those born this early were not able to survive outside the womb.
The earlier the gestation, the higher the chance of complications through the course of life. And that could be behavioural difficulties, learning difficulties. It could be physical health difficulties like lung issues. So there's a whole different range of things that can occur.
Kylie McEwen is reluctant to blame her dairy farmer neighbours for her high readings and says many of them are making real efforts to reduce the amount of nitrate coming off their properties. And she's encouraged by the likes of the recently announced National Policy Statement on Water that sets a new nitrate standard of 2.4 milligrams for waterways.
Gives me confidence that they're asking for those changes to be made, just how long they're going to give for those changes to be made, and then how long it will be before we see the effects of those changes. Because it's not damage that was done yesterday that's causing our nitrate levels now, it's things that were done 20, 30 years ago. And then with the increase in farming in the region, it's just got to compound the issue. We yet to see a peak before we see the decline.
Right now, she would like to see consideration given by the likes of Fonterra to paying for expensive nitrate filters to help fix the problem caused by their cows.
I don't think I'm being told the full story about how it got this way or what we can do to change it. And I certainly don't think that it's fully my responsibility to reverse the damage that's been done on an individual basis.
The Canterbury Regional Council says high nitrate levels are the result of 150 years of farming, and while it's set limits to reduce levels, it will take years before we see any changes. Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrill is commissioning a review of the science on the relationship between nitrates and birth outcomes. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
It is 22 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A pair of New Zealanders loom large as petrol heads around the world gear up for one of the biggest days on the global motorsport calendar. Despite entering the Indy 500 at opposite ends of the experience spectrum, the two Scots, Dixon and McLaughlin, are gunning to be number one at the Brickyard. Clay Wilson explains why both Kiwi flyers are right to be optimistic for the 105th running of the iconic oval race.
Scott Dixon is going to complete his perfect storm with a win at the Indianapolis 500.
13 years have passed since one of the biggest moments of Scott Dixon's hugely successful career. But despite all the accolades since, the 40-year-old New Zealander's third runner-up finish last year means his motivation for another Indy 500 win is higher than ever.
Last year's circumstances were definitely difficult to swallow, but it's part of it. You've got to be in the right place at the right time to make it happen. The fire is strong. The fire is not only strong for me, but for 32 others, which makes this the toughest race in the world to win.
Dixon has, though, given himself a great chance, qualifying in pole position for the fourth time. His 2008 victory came from pole, but after 18 Indy 500s, he's wary of overconfidence.
Hopefully we stay out of trouble. It should give you that gift of not having dirty air and not having people to avoid way back in the pack. So hopefully a smooth start. But yeah, it doesn't guarantee you anything. It feels nice to start there, but the hard part is trying to end up with that same result.
All facts not lost on fellow Kiwi Scott McLaughlin. But that doesn't mean the three-time Supercars champion is daunted. After an impressive start to his IndyCar career, McLaughlin's not ruling out a shock victory.
Crazier things have happened. I can put myself in the position to be somewhere near the front with strategy and with some passing. I think our car's fast enough to come through the field a little bit initially. If I get to the front and I have the chance to win, I feel like I can definitely grab a hold of that.
It's not unfounded confidence. A runner-up finish in his first oval track race earlier this month, following countryman and racing idol Dixon across the line in Texas, has McLaughlin 8th in the championship standings. The 28-year-old also much more comfortable on the famous Indianapolis Motor Speedway than his first test there 7 months ago.
I remember thinking far out, I can't imagine having 32 other people around me. And now it's like, well, I'm ready to come from 17th on the grid and get to the front.
McLaughlin knows that's easier said than done, as does well-known New Zealand motorsport figure Bob McMurray. A veteran of at least a dozen trips to the Indy 500, McMurray says the IndyCar rookie definitely shouldn't be discounted.
Scott McLaughlin has opened an awful lot of eyes over there about his speed, his racecraft, and his absolute adaptability to this form of racing when you consider where he's come from, road racing with a roof over his head. He's more than capable of scoring a very good result.
Well, we do love a good bird on national radio. And that is the sound of Dunedin, a cacophony of cheeps, chirps, cackles and crows at the National Bird Show. It is the first time the southern city has hosted the show, and roughly 1,500 chickens, ducks, canaries and other birds are on display for the next 3 days. People haven't chickened out of travelling either, with some driving down from the North Island with their birds in tow. Reporter Tess Brunton was at the show, checking to see if any of the birds quacked under the pressure.
I'm one of about 6 generations.
6 generations of bird showing?
It's me. I've got a daughter that shows, a grandson that shows, my father showed, my grandfather showed, and his...
That's Bob Middlemas. He's one of the judges at the National Bird Show and travelled down from the Ven with a trailer load of chooks. It's no easy feat to get a bird ready for show. Some people start months in advance.
Like with a silkie, you have to wash it and dry it with a blow dryer and fluff it all up and get it nice and clean. It has to be clean right down to the skin, and you might do that 3 or 4 times before a show just to get it spotless, because cleanliness comes into it, and you have to have all your birds in good condition for the judge, because if you don't have them clean, they walk past you.
By 11 a.m, he had already judged 200 birds. Some of the 10 judges looked over 250 birds today. Each bird is scored out of 100 to create a pecking order and an eventual winner. 19-year-old Serena O'Brien travelled down from Nelson to prepare her birds, which she keeps at her parents' place in Oamaru.
My dad has been showing poultry ever since he was 12. He got into it, he got given some eggs and hatched them out, and he's been hooked ever since. So pretty much I've been following Dad with a grain bucket ever since I could walk, and I've been hooked onto it ever since I was a kid.
She didn't want to miss the national show. Alistair McKinlay started breeding and showing racing pigeons when he was 15. 50 years later, he still trains racing pigeons and has 20 on show.
I've flown Gisborne and all the way back to Dunedin, so that they can, and like the North Island breeders, they send birds down to Invercargill, Stewart Island, and they fly all the way back up even to Auckland.
The Dunedin Poultry, Pigeon and Cage Bird Club is running and hosting the national show. Normally their annual local show would have about 600 birds on display. This show has more than double that. Club President Stuart Aiken says it took 4 days to organise and set up all the cages, and he's also entered some birds. He's no spring chicken when it comes to bird shows. His first prize ticket was in 1958.
It's very competitive. And it's marvellous fun. We have a lot of time. I wish a lot of other people would come along and have a look to see, because the enjoyment and the bonus of it all is you breed a beautiful bird, win a prize and you get an egg.
The National Bird Show will be open to the public over the weekend at Forrester Park in Dunedin. Most of the winners will be announced today, and for the rest, it will be better luck next time. In Dunedin, mō te hōtaka o te ahipone, ko Tess Brunton aho.
And there are some amazing looking birds in that, so do check out Tess's story online. One of those chickens looked like Cruella de Vil. Our director just musing about whether some of those posh chooks taste good. Shame on you, Calvin. Feedback before we head off. On ScoMo coming to New Zealand, Mr. ScoMo, Ryan says pre-testing should be followed up with further testing. Let's get this right so we can get on with things. If ScoMo and his entourage can fly into New Zealand, why can't other people if they follow the same procedures? Clearly a case of double standards, said this person. Why is a political trip considered to be beyond the rules that apply for all other people? On the issue of whether we should send our plastics offshore, this person says, our rubbish, our problem. We wouldn't like it if Malaysia or other countries sent their rubbish to us to deal with, says Marie. Another person says, of course we should stop sending our rubbish offshore, and to do that we need to reduce the use of plastic. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government is bringing in new restrictions on travel from Australia from next Monday, following the outbreak in Melbourne. The COVID recovery minister says Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has undergone a COVID test and will arrive on a dedicated flight for his meeting with Jacinda Ardern this weekend. Health officials in Victoria are having to track down hundreds of potential close contacts of the 30 cases in the new cluster. Patients have praised the work of staff at Waikato DHB hospitals as they battle with the IT outage. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
A traditional sheep and beef farm flirting with flavour.
Soft, melt in the mouth caramel, a little bit of salt, not too much.
Jonty makes the sweet stuff and Paddy's more on the spicy side.
So this is the chilli garden. I've got maybe close to 70 plants here at the moment, all of Mexican varieties.
A new generation tickling the taste buds.
We're really excited that our children actually want to do something different.
Country Life, Friday at 9 during nights and